The first playoff rankings of 2024 will be out in 2 weeks. 2 weeks from tomorrow. Very first playoff rankings actually come out on election night. That's a little bit interesting. But you're gonna get my top 25 here, and again, we're about a week away from projecting what the playoff committee will do with their rankings. And I do believe that my rankings will look very similar to the playoff committee, at least how I'm ranking the teams right now, which is really based off of the criteria that the playoff committee uses. Really focusing on the resume, and that's how we've been doing these rankings the last few weeks, because when you tried to, again, early in the season, you tried to rank these teams based off of their performance and how good the teams look, you just had so many inconsistencies, and we had to just go pretty much to an all resume ranking. So let's get to it, starting at the bottom, and we've got number 25, Army. All right, so Army does not have a resume at all. They haven't beaten any quality teams, but they're undefeated. They haven't lost. And when you look at the teams that I did not rank, you look at the 2-loss teams, you look at teams like Duke with 1 loss. Like, none of those teams really have much of a resume either, and they have at least 1 loss, or most of them have 2 losses. Like a Colorado, they're 5-2. They've beaten Baylor, UCF, and Arizona. I mean, that's just not much of a resume. And so I think you have to give a lot of credit to Army here for being undefeated. And it's tough to go undefeated even if you have an easy schedule. So Army gets ranked for me this week at 7-0. Alabama at number 24. They've got 2 losses now. Their 2 losses come to top 25 teams, because you see Vanderbilt just ahead of them. What's keeping Alabama in the rankings? And again, if you're a 2-loss team, you've got to have at least a couple of good wins. They've got the great win over Georgia, and then Wisconsin and South Carolina. Those are solid wins. They're not great wins, but they're good enough to get them in these rankings. And Vanderbilt, because they beat Alabama, they've got the head-to-head advantage. They should be ranked ahead of Alabama. They've got, so they do have the bad loss, but they have wins over Virginia Tech, and then, of course, Alabama, and then Kentucky. Kentucky's not great, but Virginia Tech, Kentucky are decent wins. Those are solid wins, and the Alabama one's very good. So, yeah, I've got Vanderbilt ranked here at 23. Navy at number 22. They've got the win over Memphis. Again, I ranked them last week, talked about the difference in their resume and Army's. They have that 1 win that's a pretty good win, and again, they haven't lost. So, Navy at 22, and then Washington State at 6-1 with wins over Texas Tech. That doesn't look as good now. Washington maybe doesn't look as good as it did a couple of weeks ago, but still, you lost to a ranked Boise State team. So Washington State there at number 21. Moving on to the next 5. We got Missouri at number 20. Barely survived against Auburn on Saturday, but they come back from behind and win that game. They're 6-1. They've got wins over Boston College, Vanderbilt, and Auburn. Vanderbilt's really... It's crazy that that's the only reason Missouri is ranked, because they have a win over Vanderbilt, but that is the way it is. Boise State has a win over a ranked Washington State, and their only loss came to the number 1 team in Oregon. Spoiler alert, Oregon is number 1. They were number 1 last week for me, and they're going to be number 1 again. You'll see that in just a minute. But SMU ahead of them. Resume really, it doesn't look great for them. TCU is okay. Florida State's not a great win. Stanford's not a great win, although I was impressed with them going on the road this week, all the way out west, and doing what they did to Stanford. And then Louisville is not a team that really was considered for the top 25, but that's still a team that, you have to look at teams like that and say, Louisville's a solid team. They may have 3 losses or whatever, but that's a solid team. So that's a decent win for SMU. Kansas State ahead of them. And again, Kansas State and SMU, their only loss came to BYU, who is in my top 5. You'll see that in just a second. But Kansas State has wins. They don't have any great wins, but they've put together some decent wins. Tulane, Arizona, Oklahoma State, Colorado, West Virginia. Again, not any great wins, but their loss came to a top 5 team, and they've put together several decent wins. And so that's why I think Kansas State should be at number 17. LSU at number 16. I think they're in the top 10 in the AP and coaches poll, or maybe in one of those. Again, I don't even look at those polls. But if you really look at their resume, so the Ole Miss win is a great win. Ole Miss is not ranked for me, though. When you look at Ole Miss, they don't really have any resume. Their wins are over Wake Forest and South Carolina. I mean, there's no reason that Ole Miss should be ranked if you're going by the resume. So that's not, it's a good win. It's a very solid win, but it's not a great win. South Carolina is a decent win. UCLA is a decent win. Arkansas is, a solid win, but they don't have that great win, and that's why LSU is still at 16 for me. Illinois, At number 15, as we move ahead, they're also 6-1. You see all these teams 6-1. Illinois, you've got to win over Nebraska. It doesn't look as good now. You've got to win over Michigan, and Kansas, Purdue, Illinois, and LSU. Very similar in terms of wins, but Illinois has the better loss. And circling back to LSU, they lost to USC, who now is not good at all. Illinois lost to Penn State, who's a top 10 team. So that's why Illinois is ahead of LSU. Tennessee, 6-1, wins over Oklahoma, NC State, Florida, and Alabama. Of course, the Alabama win's the big one. Florida win looking better now. Florida beating Kentucky. Florida is all of a sudden looking like a pretty good team, looking more like the team I thought they would look like. But yeah, Tennessee, huge win over Alabama, but they did lose to an unranked Arkansas team, so that's why I don't have them higher. Clemson at 6-1. Loss came to Georgia. Obviously, you lose to one of the best teams in the country. They don't have the wins, though. Florida State, NC State, Stanford, Wake Forest, Virginia, those are the teams they've beaten. I mean, none of those teams are really good at all. So I think Clemson's a top 10 team, but I can't justify ranking them that high because, again, the resume is not there. Texas A&M, they've got wins over Florida, Arkansas, a top 25 win over Missouri, also beat Mississippi State. And their only loss came to Notre Dame, who is a top 10 team for me. So, yeah, Texas A&M has a very strong resume. Pittsburgh at number 11. Yeah, they're undefeated. But, again, a resume that's lacking a little bit. You got wins over West Virginia, Cincinnati. Cincinnati's a solid team. You look at what they've done so far. North Carolina, Cal. Again, these are not great wins. I look at Pittsburgh and Iowa State very similarly. Both of these teams are undefeated, but really neither one of them have beaten any quality teams, and that's where we'll go next. Number 10 is Iowa State. So I've got Iowa State just ahead of Pittsburgh. I think you could really rank them in either order. Iowa State, they've got wins over Iowa, Houston, Baylor, West Virginia, and UCF. I think those wins are a little bit better than Pitt's, but I don't know. It's really about the same. And then we go to number 9, Notre Dame, a win over a top 15 Texas A&M, a Louisville team that, again, is a quality team. They're not ranked because they play a tough schedule and they've lost to some good teams, but that's a solid win. And again, they've got the bad loss, and that's what's keeping, if Notre Dame had lost to a top 25 team instead of Northern Illinois and they had the wins that they've got, I think Notre Dame probably would be ranked even higher. But that loss holding them back just a little bit. They've got some good wins. And you've got Miami at number 8. A win over Virginia Tech, which looks a little better now. Virginia Tech's playing pretty good football. The Florida win looks even better. Louisville's a solid win. They beat them this past weekend. They have no losses. I've got Miami there at number 8. Indiana, though, I think has a slightly better resume because of their win over Nebraska. Nebraska's a team that's borderline top 25, and the way that they won that game, Indiana has been. I'm trying not to look at the scores of these games, but Indiana has been a more dominant team than Miami. I mean, you have to look at the games. You have to look at how they've played out. Miami's had to come from behind in a couple of these games. So Indiana's been a little bit more impressive to me. Resume similar. So I've got Indiana at number 7. And then Penn State at number 6. Their resume really is not very good. They're undefeated, but wins over West Virginia, Illinois. Now, Illinois is a good win. Yeah, I got to give them credit for that one. Illinois is a solid win. But then the USC win does not look very good now. They had to go to overtime to win that game. USC has now lost to Minnesota and Maryland. So where do we put Penn State? Let's see them play Ohio State, and then we will, I think, have a better idea of where to rank the Nittany Lions. But again, that resume lacking just a little bit for me right now with Penn State. And when I was ranking this, I may have actually looked over that Illinois win. So perhaps Penn State should be ranked higher. But let's go to the top 5. And it's very tough to rank some of these teams. This is how I've got it. And I'll just go top to bottom here. So we'll start with number 1, Oregon. To me, that's clear. No doubt about it. The win over Ohio State is huge. Win over Boise State. They've got wins over UCLA, Michigan State. That looks a little better now. Purdue. So, yeah, Oregon is, there's no doubt about it. They should be number 1. And then you look at these other teams. Look, BYU has, I know people are going to push back on this, but if you look at their resume, they've got wins over SMU and Kansas State, 2 top 25 wins. Baylor, Arizona, Oklahoma State, those are not great wins, but they're conference wins against decent teams. So I've got BYU there. I mean, for Georgia, you've got wins over Clemson. You've got wins over Texas. Those are 2 very, very good wins, but they've got a loss. BYU does not have a loss. And that's really just the difference there. If Georgia had not had some struggles where at times they didn't look great this year, then I think I could justify putting them at number 2. But they at times have not looked like a top 5 team. Look at the Kentucky game, for example. So, when you look at that, you can't just say, oh, we saw Georgia and we saw they did against Texas. You have to look at the entire season. I think Georgia would beat BYU if they played today. But again, I've seen enough struggles out of Georgia where they haven't been, super consistent all year. Even though their resume, their wins are really good, they do have the loss. And so, yeah, that's where I'd put them. Again, that's very debatable. Ohio State really just does not have the wins. Iowa State, Michigan State, that's it. But their loss came to the best team in the country. So, in a close game on the road, I don't think you can penalize Ohio State much for that loss. And then Texas, again, their resume lacking a little bit. You've got Michigan, Mississippi State, Oklahoma. That's really about it. But they lost to Georgia, who's a top 5 team. Quinn Ewers, injured, still maybe not back to full strength, or at least not playing up to his full potential from what we've seen in the past. So, yeah, Texas is tough. I don't know. I think you could definitely justify ranking Penn State ahead of them, maybe even Indiana and Miami ahead of them. But again, it's tough for me to figure out what to do with Texas. Like, as I'm recording this video and I'm putting some more thought into this, I really think probably Penn State should be ahead of Texas. But I've already done the graphics, already done the video. This is what we're going to roll with this week. I'll reevaluate next week. And again, we don't just move teams up and down. It's a brand new top 25. I completely start over each week. And so these are my rankings for this week. Would love to get your thoughts, your takeaways, and how you would rank these teams. Let me know what you think down in the comments below.